Hey everyone, I'm Mike Burnett. Welcome to the Real Squabble. Today we're going to talk about the ideas and the people in history that led to Marxism, Neo-Marxism, and its relevance to critical thinking. But before we do, let me remind you to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And to help us all with this complicated subject today, I have posted on our Facebook channel a helpful link called Translations from the Wokish by James Lindsay. So if you want to go back and you want to look at some of the definitions that have been laid out by him anyway, to agree or disagree, put your comments in our comments on Facebook or in here. We'll be happy to look at it and to respond to it. So let's try to figure out this complicated issue of Marxism and Neo-Marxism, where it came from and how it affects us. And the $15 words, as Sue said earlier while we were doing this, that we try to plow through and boil down and figure out what history looks like, who are the people that are talking about this, and what their influences were leading up to modern society today. So recently on Facebook, because you guys know I post a lot about neo-Marxism and other things, variety of things that I get pushback on sometimes. But someone told me that neo-Marxism is just a scare tactic and not really a reformation of the Hegelian dialect. And we'll talk more about what that is. The Hegelian dialect. We'll explain that in some of his metaphysics later and how he come about trying to know what he knows about the world and the universe is what that really is. Did you hear that first part? Because we didn't. I did. Just for a minute there. So I got interested to a degree in neo-Marxism when I read an early communist an Italian communist by the name of Antonio Gramsci. Now, Antonio Gramsci was put in prison by Mussolini in the 1920s for his communist ideas. So the fascists were imprisoning the communists because even though they were bedfellows in some ways, they just weren't on the same sheet of music. So Gramsci's in prison there, and he writes in what they call his prison notebook, his prison notes, which is about 3,000 pages, all about how the Marxism of Karl Marx and Engels and those guys failed, the economic dialectical material Marxism, how it failed and how to take a new approach. So it became like the birth of a new kind of Marxism called Neo-Marxism, right? So while he's in there, he's writing, and one of the things that got my attention was that he said that socialism is precisely the religion that must overwhelm Christianity, and I'll add, in essence, classical liberalism, right? So I'm looking at that, and I'm thinking, okay, that was what, 100 years ago? What effect does that have on me? What did it have on, we've all hear the word communism and Marxism and socialism and all those types of things. He figured out that the economic Marxism wasn't really working back then. And he was trying to revamp it, rebrand it in essence. But where did these guys initially, if you go back philosophically, where were they getting the ideas? I think we're probably all familiar with guys like Kant, right, and Hegel, and the various philosophers, from that time period. They're German philosophers, right? Karl Marx was German, and Karl Marx was very much tapped into Hegel's philosophy, and Hegel was very much tapped into Kant's philosophy that he called, I think it was called, he had this process that was called synthesis, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, right? Which meant basically you had a thesis, something you believed, and you tried to find its opposite, and then you came to a solution or a conclusion, which is not a bad idea. I think they were what they would call They were German idealists out of the Enlightenment. So they were really thinking logically and categorically about how to come to know something. Well, Hegel is credited a lot with that whole thesis, antithesis, synthesis concept, but he didn't really come up with it. Kant did. What Hegel did is he came up with his own version called abstract, negative, concrete. So you take an abstract idea that one of us is having, right? And then I look at Sue and I go, well, no, I don't believe that. I believe this. I give you just the opposite. I play devil's advocate, right? So then we hash it out. I criticize you, you criticize me, and then we come to a synthesis or concrete. He said a concrete idea. So with these philosophers from Kant and Hegel, they're moving from ideas and the whole idea of us bouncing ideas back and forth, which is a good thing, to Karl Marx is listening and thinking, okay, how can I make this work economically? How can I create a struggle, a conflict between these two ideas to upset the economy and basically create a conflict between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, right? The oppressed and the oppressor.
So you're saying his goal was conflict?
Well, Karl Marx's goal in his writing was to take that concrete idea, that synthesis, and roll it into a real way of doing something, because he saw a lot of what he considered the failures of working people in London back then and how he thought it should be made better, right? So he's thinking that he's going to create a better world by doing this, a utopia, right?
So the goal was utopia. He was going to get there through conflict.
Through conflict, economic conflict, right? So that, but then, and
you're talking about mid 1800s.
Well, yeah, I think
Victorian era.
I think that the
similar to say Dickens.
I think his manifesto was written like somewhere around 1856.
Yeah, so like the Dickens sort of look at the way the little guy was beat up or whatever, right? It's that same era.
Right after, Kant and Hegel, that same generation of people, they considered themselves philosophically young.
Yeah, there was a whole movement of that all over the world, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Lots of literary
especially in Germany. Especially because they considered themselves what they called the young Hegelians, right? So they really were examining Karl Marx, Hegel, Fichte, Feuerbach, all these names you can look up. They were in this group called the Young Hegelians, which, Engel was really the guy who was the brains of the operation, as far as I can remember. You can chime in if you know more. But
okay, so Gramsci, I don't mean to bump anything, but Gramsci was saying, yeah, no, that doesn't work.
That's right, and I'll get more to him in just a moment. But those ideas are going back and forth right now, right?
And those guys did not original thought. Those things came from the Greeks.
Well, it did. I mean, if you wanted to go way back.
Okay, just making sure.
If you wanted to go all the way, I mean, you could really drill down deep to Aristotelian thought if you wanted to. And this is a subject that requires months and years.
And early Christianity. I mean, the original teachings of Jesus being take care of the poor, open it. It's very egalitarian in that regard.
It is, and very Socratic, right?
Yeah.
In asking questions, which is what
Socrates did. Original thought, by the time we get to the mid 1800s, is turning into this attempt to create a utopia through conflict. Okay, got it.
Right. So in all that conflict, what they created was basically what they called negative thinking or criticism, right? And that whole idea of critical thinking, we'll talk a little bit more later in the program. But Hegel has these analogies that he gives of the master-slave dialect, right? That's that victim, oppressed oppressor type of worldview, right? Where he tells the story of two independent self-consciousnesses who encounter one another, and they gauge each other in a life and death struggle, right? So that struggle for Hegel was ongoing. It was almost a spiritual. Some people call it the religion of Hegel, right? So that you are a consciousness, you struggle in your consciousness, you conflict, you go back and forth, and ultimately, he's difficult to read, but people say that he was a Christian or a Lutheran. But if you read some of his works, he actually sounded more like he was a pantheist, right? Saying that absolute knowledge in God was in process and changing, and would eventually emerge from that dialectic, that criticism consciousness, right? So it's really kind of wacky from normal Orthodox, Judaism or Christianity.
Mike, I wanted to get back to something that we seem to be talking around, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of people who do not have or let's say a lot of people who have a socialistic or a big government or or that kind of an idea, that tends to act or function or sit in their heart or mind as in place of a religion.
Yeah, it can. And we have to, one of the things I'm going to bring up in a little while is how we use words and how we define words, right? Because there is nothing wrong with having social programs, right? And we as a free country can decide on how many social programs do we want until we lose control, right, of our freedoms. And I think that's an ongoing balancing act, and that's a fear of some of getting too close to the line. For instance, there was a huge battle when Social Security started, wasn't there? Right?
Well, I don't remember that.
We're all becoming socialist, and okay, it did start taking more money from people. It has become a security blanket for a lot of people. But then again, we do want to take care of each other. We want to look for good ways to take care of each other. But that's for another show. Gramsci in the 1920s, like I said, he was put in prison, and he came up pretty much with this neo-Marxist road map, which is interesting because if you read a lot about Gramsci is how you say it, he did not believe in objective truth. He didn't believe that you could really know anything, but he lived in the world that he lived in and thought that through this, if he got rid of religion, he got rid of obstacles in the media and education and things like that, which is something that he got out of Hegel, because Hegel really believed that the power was in the institutions, right? The power and the way we teach people and the way we shape our culture. And he wasn't wrong. There's a lot of truth in that. He noticed that, and he called that's what that is called, is a cultural hegemony, right? So a hegemony is when, we learn and listen and we believe in objective truth, and we go to the university and we believe in classical liberalism, right? The John Locke liberalism of the freedoms that we have and that we just celebrated on this July 4th. He did not believe in that. He wanted to turn that on its head in a neo-Marxist way to advance communism. It was a new godless system aimed at influencing the schools, media, courts, politics, and family. And it's really, if you read what he wrote in his prison notes, it's not an overstatement. That was the goal. And these are things that have been picked up in our society in recent years. Gramsci believed that the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, used cultural institutions to maintain power. So they were going to use neo-Marxist ideas, critical thinking, like I said, we'll get more to that later, to advance neo-Marxist ideas in the cultural institutions, in education and media and all those types of ways. That's why it's important for us to not blindly listen to someone or something. Music, we were talking about that before we came on. Art and music are there. What did you say, Glenn?
Emotion, to evoke emotion.
Right. They evoke emotion, and they quite often are there not just to evoke emotion. You know, people use, and we talked about it when we had our trans LGBTQ conversation about how we believe that there was some media that was taking inroads to advance, and people do that. People do that. It's just this is what we're doing today. We're just making ourselves aware of what people are intentionally trying to do so that we know it's there, so we can accept it, deny it, not patronize it if we don't want to, or patronize it. You know, part of our freedoms is having freedom until we vote ourselves out of freedom, like Germany did prior to Hitler taking reins, right? I mean, it was crazy because, as you guys well know, right before Hitler, during the Weimar Republic, Germany was a republic. They were from 1918 to what, 1933 or in that area. Germany was a republic. They made some bad decisions. People trusted the government. They lost power, and they rolled into fascism. Go ahead.
And
go ahead, Glenn. Go. I'll follow you.
I was just going to say, if my memory serves me correctly, Hitler actually really liked Hegel and the Hegelian religion, if we would want to call it that.
Right. He did, because all of the ideas in there created conflict and identity politics, and it got the whole idea rolling. And Hitler also got a lot of ideas from Jim Crow, believe it or not. So he's looking at all these philosophical ideas and things that are really being done, things that were done during the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, and things like that, which was the only successful operation, really, was the Bolshevik Revolution. Others had tried after that, and it failed. And some of the people that tried to implement some of the Communist Party ideas that Lenin started, you know, to have that leadership, that leader dictatorship of communism, and that Communist Party that shepherded the people, people tried to carry it on. They failed in Poland and other places, which you can read about. And then a few of them came into what in Germany was known as the Frankfurt School. And you guys familiar with Germany know that where Frankfurt is. The American Forces Radio and Television Network used to be in Frankfurt. Maybe you've been to the Goethe University. That is where the Frankfurt School was. That's where guys like, who's the famous psychologist? Freud, Max Horkheimer, Adorno, I think, Marcuse, some other people that loved the ideas being presented from Gramsci and others, formed because they believed in the socialist movement.
Okay, so not to cut you off, but my question at this point is, as fascinating as all the history is, what relevance does this have to where we are living and dealing with today?
Well, it has a lot. And, you know, I wanted to try to go through it methodically so that we would understand why and what the very strong influences are. Let me try to put it in synoptic form, if I can. So you have all these forces who are very much and strongly reading Antonio Gramsci's work.
And presumably you have alternative theories that are equally balanced in our culture.
You do. And at the time, you have to understand that society was basically traditional and Lutheran in Germany. right? So all of the old school, you have to understand, in the mid 1500s, that's when Hegel took importance. That when Karl Marx started to speak up. That is when Nietzsche started writing, right? The whole God is dead thing was all formed out of that communist, atheistic, naturalist mentality that Hitler tied into, because he didn't believe in God. He believed the whole Reich, the whole Reichskirche was.
Now we're 80 years past it.
Was religious language. So out of the Frankfurt School, you have people like Herbert Marcuse and Rudi Deutschke, who came up with these concepts. Rudi Deutschke, a German activist at the universities, came up with the idea called the long march through the universities, right? So that's how you do things. It's the whole boil the frog in hot and cold. Start with cold water and you turn it up, and they don't notice until they don't jump out of the pan. They boil and die. So that was the idea that Rudi Deutschke got from Mao. The long march through China, the Great Leap Forward, where he changed the culture and just killed people and slaughtered it so they could advance Marxism and kill. He tried to put people against each other, the people in martial arts and the temples and wherever, they were killed. Anyone with education that didn't believe in communism with Mao was killed. The same thing was happening with Stalin and with Lenin. They were killed. But all these ideas were still believed that they could help us reach a utopia. And what Marcuse and others did, that I won't go all into detail about, is they started to implement these neo-Marxist ideas. You can read one of his books called Counter-Revolution and Revolt from 1972 into the universities, right? So slowly you have these communist revolutionaries who are getting inroads to American universities. They're becoming tenured professors, and they're starting to gradually and slowly implement it into our drinking water. Okay, so that's where the rubber starts to meet the road, as you can well imagine. That's how we do it in media. That's how we do it in everything.
So was this the point in America where we started to have the McCarthyism, and where they started pushing back against these kinds of thoughts?
Yeah, we sure did, because in America too, it was still more tradition and mostly a Judeo-Christian country, especially during the 50s. And even if people weren't educated and knowledgeable about it, they were underinformed, I should say. They still, if they heard the word communism, there was a flag. The flag went up, right? And a lot of people got hurt at that time that weren't, really that way because of all the fear mongering. But again, another show. Marcuse became known as the father of the New Left, right? If you read about him, the New Left, the universities, the activism in the universities and the writing that happened, he became known as that because he was criticizing the American government, the way we've done things, and trying to create that conflict, that ongoing conflict, to say what we're doing is bad. And
this was post FDR?
No, we're talking the 60s and the early 70s.
The 1960s and 70s.
The 1960s.
Yeah. So meaning, if he's the new left, meaning FDR was the old left? Well, and the social programs that he put in place, I'm trying to get a balance somewhere.
Well, again, you have to be careful about how you word things, because,
sure.
FDR and social programs can be categorized as left by some, but we look back and we say, well, okay, he struck a good balance maybe. And I don't know what all his ideas and principles were or where he got them. I do know that there are things that show that FDR was, he invited the Ku Klux Klan to the White House.
But basically he believed in using the government to better the condition of the people because it was the middle of the Depression when he got elected.
Right. So, the New Deal, and Herbert Hoover did nothing.
I mean, in the extremely synthesized version of FDR is that he decided to use the power of the government to better the conditions of the people that were suffering so greatly throughout the country.
So let's be careful to remember that left in the John Locke sense of being on the left is what America is all about. Okay. Being compassionate, loving freedom, wanting to help people. Now,
FDR was a lot more radical than just being compassionate. He tapped into the tax base and created new stuff to give a lot of, including Social Security.
True. And we won't debate that.
Okay. I mean, I'm just saying, I'm trying to get a context for Marcuse being 20, 30 years later than that kind of leftist.
To my knowledge, and I don't know, I haven't read anything about FDR being overtly influenced by neo-Marxism. I haven't read anything about him being.
I would say that's. I haven't read anything about it either. I didn't go looking for it.
I think what I'm trying to say is I think all of us have been influenced by it. He could have been. I don't know. And it's debatable between, when we say left and right, we're really not, and I'm not talking about left and right necessarily on the political scale of presidents. What I'm talking about is ideology and philosophy that perhaps they were influenced by, even subconsciously, maybe overtly, maybe we all are. It's just something for us to chew on. Marcuse, on the other hand, knew and intentionally implemented neo-Marxism into his teaching. He taught, I forget at which universities, him and guys like Michael Foucault and Diderot and those guys out of France and coming into American universities really believed in communism and neo-Marxism. And they became very influential in American universities, right? And they started to really strongly tap into what was called critical theory, right? They were tapping in, and from a few things you have to understand. I go back to saying you have to define your words. Neo-Marxists, and I put a whole list of definitions on our Facebook page, The Real Squabble, are not using the word critical in the sense of critical think, like we think we're thinking about it rationally and how we can make it better. In a neo-Marxist lens, people who are neo-Marxists are looking through they're critical. They mean you're critical if you're looking through it through a Marxist lens with Marxist thinking to help influence those institutions, to create conflict, criticism, to make change and push it toward a society that they think is better. Right? That utopia. Ultimately, in their minds, it's still that socialistic utopia that they're pushing for. And yes, at the same time, Sue, and Glenn, other people are pushing back. And that struggle is going on right now. I'm pushing back against it because I see it. I see it in things that I read and I listen to. And it's just sort of a Paul Revere moment, I think.
So you think that there's an entire couple of generations, including ours, we're all of the generation that would have been taught in the 60s and 70s, maybe early 80s, you think there's entire generations, certainly that went to college, that have been heavily influenced, and I don't want to say brainwashed, but heavily influenced to change their approach to what they're doing without balance?
Well, I don't know. I think making a judgment about what balance is will be yours, right?
Right.
So what I will say is you just have to look at the line of people who learn from people, right? So we know that, but you guys brought up the Greeks. We know that Plato learned from Socrates. We know that Aristotle learned from Plato. We know that Alexander the Great learned from Aristotle, right? The thinking goes through history. People learn from others. And the thinking going from Kant to Hegel to Marx, Engels to Lenin to Stalin to Gramsci to the Frankfurt School to Hitler to whomever in institutions, the principle, they've gotten smarter. and they're looking for not ways of forcing it like they tried to force the Bolshevik Revolution. They're looking at ways of making you slowly drink the Kool-Aid. And now I mentioned Marcuse. Angela Davis, black activist, is a student of Marcuse. Also, interestingly enough, the writings of Antonio Gramsci obviously were in Italian, right? And they were not translated into English until the late 60s, early 70s at Notre Dame. And do you know who translated them? And I'm not saying that this means anything, but Pete Buttigieg's dad, Joseph Buttigieg, was on the panel translating the neo-Marxist writings. So all I'm saying is, who influenced whom, right? Stuff started getting into our institutions. The long march through the institutions was very known. It was very understood. It was implemented on purpose by educators in they call it pedagogy, right?
Put it to now. How does it affect now? Give me a concrete example of how it's affecting.
You just want to wind me up, don't you?
No, I'm not trying to wind you up.
Because I'm with Sue.
I'm 30 minutes into the history and I'm looking for the relevance.
Okay, yes. I think I have mentioned some of the relevance in that we have Marxist thinking in our society and in our culture. Does that not seem relevant to you?
No, I need a lot more specific.
But give us an example of where you're seeing this in today's society. That I think is, I don't want to speak for Sue, but I know that's my question.
Okay. Well, Glenn, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say that the critical thinking, I think, is where we're going to end up talking about critical theories of one type or another. And this is kind of the seed of the critical theory. But what is critical race theory?
Okay. That's what I'm trying to help you understand is that if you say the word critical in front of critical race, critical anything that's out there, critical diversity, critical justice, social justice, whatever it is, they don't mean necessarily the same word that you mean. The neo-Marxists, when they write and put things out there, like Angela Davis or the lady who wrote White Fragility, here's a real world example. And I'm not saying everything they do is bad, okay? Because Black Lives Matter. To me, that's a given. Black Lives Matter. Every life matters. Black Lives Matter. I love Black people. I love white people. I love all people. As a Christian, I try to anyway. But Black Lives Matter organization, the global network, has three founders are Marxists, and they don't deny it. They are Marxists. Journalists have come out to try to say, no, they're not. And then I can even post a video where one of them says, yeah, I'm a Marxist. They studied the teachings in school. The Black liberation movements, a lot of them have good aspects, but they are peppered. They are peppered through with neo-Marxism. And a lot of the neo-Marxists, white neo-Marxists, like to try to create that neo-Marxist conflict management within race or justice or whatever. I don't want to just pick on race or talk about race, but in that area, they're trying to create a victim oppressor neo-Marxist philosophical idea to pit each other against each other. Because when we say equity, for instance, we mean fairness. We mean we want to deal fairly with each other, justice. We want to do right by each other. We want the whole Martin Luther King concept of being judged by the content of our character, having equal opportunities, right? We want that for women and minorities and for everyone. The neo-Marxists, when they use the word critical race theory, and they use words like inclusion, diversity, justice, that is not what they mean. They don't mean it in the same way. They want to create conflict within those identity groups so that they can create a cultural revolution, a neo-Marxist communist style type of revolution to bring about change, but not in the same way that, say, Lenin had a Bolshevik revolution. They want to do what Hegel talked about, the evolution, the shaping of the conscious, right?
So who's the mystical they? Who's they?
What do you mean?
Well, who's neo-Marxist? I'm trying to get a context in my head.
Okay.
In my head, if you had a big long spectrum of let's just say political thought theory right now in this country, in the US only, right? If you had a big long stretch, it's almost wrapping itself around the backside now. You have neo-nationalists on the far right. I guess you're saying neo-Marxist on the very far left. And in some cases, they're coming together to agree on some stuff, which is boggling my mind completely. Yeah. But I'm trying to get a context for who you think they are and where this affects us most. I think what I'm hearing you say is that it has been fomenting in university, in academia for 50 years, at least since the 60s, with Marcuse and Angela Davis, learning from him and all of that. So I think what you're saying is for a solid 50, 60 years, it's been affecting critical thought in the small t concept, and that is now spilling out into the streets in ways like Black Lives Matter.
Well, also in White Fragility, and there's a few other books that are on the bestseller list out there. I may have to post it in our feed later.
And so I think what you're saying is the root of this problem right now is universities aren't unbalanced and need to be more balanced. Well, that's what I'm hearing you say. I don't think that's all you're saying.
No, it's really not. It's a complicated issue. It's something you need to think about, ruminate on for a while. But I think most of us probably intuitively know that most of the state universities are more liberal than they are conservative. I would venture to say that most professors are more liberal than they are conservative.
I don't even know that that's been proven. I mean, I think there's been studies done on that in the 2000s, in this century. There's been studies done on that where they asked them, like, every college professor at 45 universities, and it comes out to be sort of a wash. I mean, I had both, so I don't know. I think you can pick certain schools are more liberal and certain schools are more conservative. I don't know that you can say across the board.
Well, okay, let's say, I will support that in more detail with some links. But I think that you can look at the professors, say at schools like Princeton, Harvard, and Yale. And
how about the University of Arkansas? Throw them in there, and the University of Iowa and the University of Nebraska. What I'm saying is I think you can pick certain schools. I could say Liberty University and get massively conservative. Like, I bet there's not a liberal instructor there, or very few. Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, and that's not fair. But what I'm saying is,
I think you're right, and I think we're not presenting each other with evidence at this point.
Right. Because I didn't know that topic was going to be discussed.
Yeah, and me neither. Yeah. And that's.
Can I break in here for a second?
Please.
When we say neo-Marxist or Marxist thinking, what is it that we're talking about? Can we just simplify it there? What is a besides the revolution, the cultural revolution? I mean, is thinking that that you shouldn't walk down the street on the right-hand side of your wife Marxist? I'm a little lost of what we're talking.
No, not at all. Because it's ideas. Any of our ideas and how we teach our children, or how we train ourselves and develop good habits and character, good character, our morals. everything that happens in our life is progressive, right? It doesn't happen all at once, right? So what I'm saying is this whole history of philosophy and teachers and people who have written about it and tried to, they have been from the time of Freud and those guys at the Frankfurt School in Germany and onwards through the Long March. It was purposely put into and called the Long March through the institution so that we could slowly inculcate a new way of thinking. Now, specifically, okay, Glenn, the Neo-Marxism, if you want like a real no kidding definition, this is what they say. Neo-Marxism is a Marxist school of thought encompassing 20th century approaches that amend or extend Marxism and Marxist theory, typically by incorporating elements from other intellectual traditions such as critical theory, psychoanalysis, and existentialism. So that is what it is, but I've given you some other thoughts about how people have used it in a wrong-headed way through the years. The bottom line is, if you want to, I think anyway, if you want to remain a freedom-loving, classic liberal country in the John Locke sense of being able to make your choices, to have free will, to be able to build a business like you have, Sue, and to be able to hold on to your money and to hire people. And I think in a real world sense, you would say, okay, if I'm the owner and creator of my business like you are, and I came up with the innovation and the ideas, why should I hire people and they make the same money as I do? Because they didn't come up with the money, the ideas, the innovation, or the equipment, right? That's Marxism. Marxism wants to make sure that it doesn't really matter whether you came up with the ideas or you took the risk or the responsibility. You know, we want to move toward this.
Well, I don't actually see that that's practically anything that anybody's suggesting anywhere in our society.
Okay,
that we equalize the owner's income to the lowest common denominator in the country. I do not see that happening anywhere. I do, however, see an attempt at using Christian principles, not Marxist principles, Christian principles to make sure that a living wage is provided. And I have no argument with that. And I also see the importance and the value of some of my hard-earned money going to support infrastructure like water systems and roads and, you know, and that kind of thing. So generically, I don't have a problem for using profit margin to better the community and better the conditions of my workers. And that's not saying I'm going to pay them what I pay myself, right? There's a line somewhere in there, and we struggle with that in this country. We have for 200 years.
What I think is the operative word there is you said, I don't mind doing X, Y, and Z.
Right.
But if Marxism or neo-Marxism actually takes a foothold, there would be no I feel and I believe and I don't mind. It will be actually in a Maoist, Leninist way. If you give the government, and I think that's really a fear for a lot of people. And it's just something, it's not to be, you know, the sky is falling, but it's philosophical. It's actual awareness of these people who are writing. It is all of this thinking, and I'll post a couple books that are from these folks in our feed, are actually writing about it. It is riddled through the book White Fragility, which is a nonsense.
I just think that we're balanced. I think we're a lot more balanced than that. I don't see the fear. I think that entire 200 years of history that you were talking, or 150 years of history that you were talking about, Hegel and all the way through all that history was equally balanced by church attendance and a completely different approach to, particularly Christianity in our case, but that it was very balanced. So you had this one side looking at the political issues and how to do things, and you had a whole other side talking about taking care of your neighbor and giving you grounded philosophy. So I don't necessarily think that it's overrunning us, I guess is my point. And I get very concerned in general, very general terms, at fear mongering in our politics, which has been running for 250 years. So it's not news, but
it used to be
just in general, the idea that, oh my God, we have to be afraid to talk to these people because they're so drastic and they're instantly going to go from A to Z with no B in between.
All right, can I jump in?
Yeah, please. Sorry, I just got on.
I think that I'm in agreement with much of what you said. Again, let's go back to the word fear. There's a healthy fear that people can have, and there's I'm losing my mind crazy fear. You can have a fear of fire. You should have a healthy fear of fire or touching the stovetop. There's a fear of making sure you look both ways before you cross the street so you don't get run over. And I do agree with you that it has not overwhelmed our society. But if you're paying attention to the philosophical winds and some of the scholastic winds, which is where it always starts, any type of movement starts in the universities. It starts with teaching the young people, re-inculcating the Hitler Youth, right? To
be fair, we start inculcating our children in Christian churches long before they get to university.
Right. And I think that there's good.
Well, pretty much everybody's church.
It's the same with fear of fire. There's a good thing with teaching your children what we consider good morals and values, right? I do not consider, and that's my personal opinion, okay?
Yeah.
I consider atheistic communism a bad thing. I consider the control of atheistic communism something I never want to get close to me. I see a lot of people like Angela Davis and others.
Is she still alive? I'm just trying to get a context.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know.
I think so. I see them.
I don't see her much, I guess is what I'm saying.
But they're out there speaking and on the news, and I have a news feed with like 100 different news sources that come across it.
Billy Graham's son was here, or grandson was here in Fredericksburg speaking to 4,000 people this week. There's lots of people out speaking. So I feel like the other two are just listening to the two of us and dying to get in. But.
I have a quick question. Maybe Jackie and I can have a conversation. I was trying to think about how things are maybe slowly moving in a direction that Mike wants to illuminate. And so I was thinking about my parents. I grew up in Montana. My parents have a flower shop. My sister bought it from them, so it's still in the family. And here in Washington State, this went to the Supreme Court, where a guy that had a flower shop here in Washington refused to make flowers for a gay wedding.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was a baker that refused to make a
baker, I think.
It's a cake.
So, but anyway, my family talks about this. My gosh, what would I do? We're Christians. That's not something that my sister saying it's not something that we hold to. Would we do it? Mm-hmm. And now you're getting the government coming by and saying you can't pick and choose who you're going to serve as your company. Is that a representation of how this Hegelian thinking is pushing into our society?
I think it could be. I don't know that it is. I can't argue, I don't know that case, but I think the point is you need to, Sue is very positive, and I'm glad. I love how things are now too. I love the world we live in and America that we're in. I see things that I think are important. I see people speaking to it. And you do see those influences out there, Glenn, at those stores and at those places. And the fear for someone like me is that government could get to the point like the Weimar Republic, where the people are kind of the underinformed people who just think life is beautiful, relinquish control to the new power in the Third Reich and Berlin, and they wonder what hit them. Right? They wonder what hit them, because the whole thing, even in that time with Stalin and with Hitler, it was all a slow roll. It wasn't to Kristallnacht and some of the other places. And people were denying, oh, that can't happen. That wouldn't happen. And we have lots of, I think, episodes like that through history. And I would add, maybe I think that perhaps even wokeism is a baby or a denomination of Neo-Marxism, right? Or postmodern thinking. It's sort of a fusion between Neo-Marxism and postmodern thinking, right? So that there is no objective truth.
Or maybe it's just an attempt to be empathetic and have some understanding that there are different points of view.
Oh yeah, and you know what? You're very reasonable, and I hope that you're the next president.
No, you really don't. Trust me, you do not. In particular, you do not.
Pollyanna for president.
You know, don't misunderstand positive optimism for uninformed. Go ahead.
Well, I never said you're uninformed. I just said you're positive. But
Jackie, I think Jackie wants to hop in.
No, I was just saying I would vote for Sue in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Shit.
Absolutely. So, my opinion is that it does matter. It's out there. If you don't think it matters and you don't think it's out there, at least now and today, if you're listening to this, you have heard a different side of it, right? You've heard some discussion about it.
I don't doubt it's out there. I just think
you've
that
heard some names that maybe you didn't hear before, some ideas you never, ran into before. And that way, if you do come up against it, you go, oh, okay. And it's I think ignorance is bliss, but I don't like, and I'm not talking to you guys, but I like to try to stay informed. We can be wrong about people and ideas. I think whether it be Marxist, neo-Marxist, or whatever, we got to keep our eyes open, and we don't have to fearmonger or be fearful, but we should always, in a patriotic way, represent who we are, and what we want. How does that sound? Any last thoughts?
Who's got last thoughts?
Okay, this could kick off a whole new thing, and we don't have time for a whole new thing, but I'm going to throw this out there. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I've been uncharacteristically quiet, I think, during this particular hour. And yes, Mike sent us all a bunch of research to look at, and I found a lot of it fascinating. And it did make me question a few things that I have seen happening and going on. Mm-hmm. But I am one of those people, right? I am one of those people who believe that your character is shaped by the company you keep, by the things you watch, by the music you listen to, all of that. Mm-hmm. So a very brief example of what I'm talking about is I love my husband, dear God, to death, right? But that man watches the news and he loses his mind. He loses his mind. He turns into somebody I don't like and I don't know. And I'm like, you just need to breathe and back up. So I think, saying that we need to watch for the fear mongering, yes. Mm-hmm. Say that we need to watch for, what was it? The fear mongering and watch for signs or what have you. Yes.
Yeah.
But I think if you allow yourself to get too wrapped up, and I don't care. I don't care if it's spiritual, political, I don't care.
Yeah.
You get too wrapped up in any one subject.
Yeah.
You're doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah.
humanity.
No, I agree fully with you. And I had that conversation with my wife, Sherry, the other day. The balanced life is important,
Yeah.
Family, faith, friends, to be well-read, to listen to the news without losing your mind, and to understand history, and that the cultural hegemony is all about using and flipping those nice things you said upside down and using it against society. And realize it is out there. It is a force. It is being taught, and it's not knocking on your door at the moment. Do you hear anything, Sue? It's not.
Yes. No, that's my phone. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I thought, I'll see. Some neo-Marxist is trying to telemarketer is trying to call.
I'm sure they're a neo-Marxist telemarketer. Yes.
Well, I think they all are. So anyway, guys, thanks so much. I know we could
wait. So Glenn, what's your closing thought?
Yeah.
Sorry. Burp.
Glenn's done.
I'm done.
You're done. Okay. Hey, anyway, thanks, guys.
I want to close with Richard Rogers, who, by the way, was happening long before Marcuse. So I don't know how this fits in, because Richard Rogers was massively influential to whole generations of people. Okay. You have to be carefully taught. You have to be taught to learn to hate. To hate all the friends your relatives hate. You have to be carefully taught. I get it that we're concerned about how people are being taught, but I literally every night at dinner time, no matter who's visiting, no matter who's at our table, if we're out to dinner someplace else, I always ask the same question, because I think people don't put balance enough in their life. And the question is, what made you smile today? You've had an opportunity now to dump everything from the day, download the guy that cut you off, etc. What made you smile today? I tell every one of my grandparents, grandchildren, go out. What brought you joy today? Find something that will bring you joy today, every day. My point is, it's about balance, right? We have to be concerned with some of this stuff, and we have to be careful that we're not teaching hate in either direction, right? Open your mind, think about it all through, everything else, make your own decisions, but then make sure you balance all that weight with something joyful, something light every day.
Agreed.
I agree with you 100%. We're always learning from someone, and we teach people how to treat us. So we really, we do need to spend 99% of our day trying to be, and even with things we don't like, it doesn't mean we have to be hateful about it, right? I have had people just come at me with hammers, and I'm like, wait a minute, I didn't accuse you of that. I'm just stating something that I think. And that's important to have, like we decided before we did this, is to have peaceful conversations about things. When we all are done, we've all did morning shows, which were primarily meant to help people to laugh and smile and get through their difficult days, right? And to not do it so blindly, though, that you fall in a ditch. So that you start to learn a little bit about self-awareness and what's around you and what's going on. And back to the word that we all agreed on is the balance. So, hey, thank you for that, Sue. I appreciate that. Everyone.
Namaste.
All right. So this kind of a conversation could go on for days and hours. It's fascinating. I found it very, very fascinating, but we'll have to wrap it up here. That concludes the show. Tell us what you think about the Real Squabble. Suggest topics, and remember to like us on Facebook and subscribe to YouTube. We'll see you next time on the Real Squabble.
Queen wave.